Please welcome back to the stage Dr. Stephanie Tompkins.
Hey everybody. It's a real honor for me to introduce our next and final keynote speaker for the event, the Secretary of the United States Army, Christine Wormuth. You know, it's actually a really special privilege for me. Those of you that don't know, not only have I served in the Army, but pretty much most of the members of my family have all served in the Army and no other service. We are an entirely Army family. So this is particularly worth noting for me and mine back home. It's also worth noting that College Station is Secretary Wormuth's hometown. So Secretary Wormuth is the senior civilian official within the Department of Defense responsible for all matters relating to the United States Army. Throughout her career in government service and in the private sector, she's provided guidance on a whole range of national security issues. Now, prior to her confirmation last year, she served as director of the International Defense and Security Center at the RAND Corporation. She previously served as a special assistant to the president and senior director for defense at the National Security Council. Also as Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Forces, and as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. So I'm sure you all agree that she is incredibly well qualified to speak to all of you today, and we're so excited to have her here. So she'll first provide remarks and then take a few questions. So please join me in welcoming Secretary Wormuth to DARPA Forward.
Hi, everyone. It is so great to be here, and thank you so much, Director Tompkins, for the introduction, for your leadership of DARPA, which is really a critical engine of technological innovation for the defense community, but also, frankly, for the entire country. The DARPA Forward series helps connect the defense mission to innovative talent hubs throughout the country, and it is great to be back here in my hometown, the home of the Aggies, and I'm so excited to be able to put a spotlight on national security issues. It was also great for me earlier today to talk to members of the Texas A&M Corps of Cadets, which is the largest producer of military officers outside of our nation's service academies. West Point, which obviously I'm partial to as the Secretary of the Army, but also the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy. I'm really pleased this afternoon to have the opportunity to share all that the Army is doing to tackle pressing high-technology national security challenges, working with DARPA, working with Texas A&M, and working with our innovation partners all around the country. In the late 70s and early 80s, back when I was just a kid in junior high right here in College Station, DARPA was working on a state-of-the-art project to create an effective fire-and-forget weapon that could counter the threat that we were facing back then from Soviet tanks during the Cold War. And at the same time, the Army Night Vision Laboratory was developing breakthrough infrared focal plane technology. DARPA and Army scientists worked together, and the fruits of their labor from those years resulted in the Javelin missile. And I think it's really remarkable to think that a breakthrough technology conceived over 4 decades ago between DARPA scientists and Army personnel is still having such a profound impact on the battlefield today as the Ukrainian military fights so bravely and effectively to push back the invading Russian forces. And the Army DARPA Javelin story reminds us, I think, of how much is possible when we work together on tough national security challenges. Coming back to today, when you think about the Army, words like change and innovation may not be the first things that come to your mind. But I am here, among other things, to tell you that we are not your grandfather's Army anymore. We are changing. We are transforming into a high-tech Army. An Army that's ready to handle today's challenges as well as challenges far into the future. And key to our transformation is a culture of innovation powered by partnerships with DARPA, with academia, and with industry. I think, people may not always associate the Army with change, but in reality, the Army has consistently innovated over the years to meet newly emerging threats with disruptive concepts and technologies. During the Cold War, we developed air-land battle doctrine, and the Big Five systems that went with it. And frankly, a lot of those systems, like the Abrams tank, the Bradley fighting vehicle, the Patriot air defense system, and of course the Apache and Black Hawk helicopters, are still with us in the Army today. But we have launched a major modernization agenda to bring a whole new series of weapon systems into the Army. But also, during the War on Terrorism, the Army developed the Counter Radio Electronic Warfare System, or CREW, to help soldiers defeat deadly improvised explosive devices. And we all certainly remember those from the last 2 decades of the global war on terrorism. CREW basically helped our soldiers block the radio signals that insurgents were using to detonate those IEDs, and CREW was critical to helping us defeat that threat. And those are just examples of how I think in almost every conflict, the Army has adapted and innovated to defeat the adversary. Several years ago, we realized that the future of warfare was once again changing and that the Army was going to have to change with it. We would once again need to push ourselves to become more innovative and more agile. So in 2018, we made the decision to establish Army Futures Command as a new 4-star command to help us build the Army of 2030. Army Futures Command would focus on developing new operational concepts for the Army and recommending requirements for new weapon systems. And we made a deliberate decision in 2018 to locate Future Command headquarters in Austin, the center of a vibrant tech ecosystem right here in Texas. And part of the reason we did that was to ensure that we would bake innovation and partnerships with industry, with academia, into Army Futures Command's DNA. And coming out of the work we've been doing on new operational concepts and doctrine for the Army of 2030, it's now very clear to us that in the coming years, the Army is going to have to be able to do really 6 key things in order to prevail in future conflicts. First of all, the Army of 2030 is going to have to see and sense farther and more persistently across the battlefield than our enemies. To do that, we are going to need to collect and analyze unprecedented amounts of new raw data from all sorts of different sources, whether it is satellites, UAVs, open source information like social media. We're going to have to be able to bring all of that together to be able to see the battlefield more clearly. Second, the Army of 2030 is going to have to deliver more combat power more effectively than ever before. It's really about bringing together combat power of all kinds, infantry, armor, aviation, quickly from dispersed locations all around the battlefield into a powerful fist that can punch hard at the adversary at a time and place of our choosing. Third, we're going to have to be able to win the fires fight by delivering precise, longer-range fires to stripe deep targets and also massing enemy forces. And you just have to, again, look at what's happening in Ukraine to see the importance of fires in wars of today and tomorrow. And so to do that, we're going to develop new powerful artillery and ground-launched missiles, including our long-range hypersonic weapon, which is currently under development. Fourth, the Army of 2030 is going to have to be able to protect our own forces from air and missile attacks and drone attacks. And to do that, we're going to have to develop new integrated air and missile defenses using more advanced radars, more sophisticated command and control software, high-energy lasers, and microwaves. Fifth, we're going to have to be able to rapidly share and communicate data with ourselves across our platforms, but also with our sister services, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the Space Force, and even going beyond that with our coalition partners, our allies and partners. And finally, the sixth thing that the Army of the 2030 is going to have to do is we're going to have to be able to sustain the fight across very long distances where the enemy is challenging our ability to move, as I like to say, from fort to port to foxhole. You know, given the kinds of sophisticated nation-state threats that we face right now, we are going to, I believe, if we ever do find ourselves in another real war, we are going to be challenged right here at home in the United States as we try to project our forces away from the continental United States overseas, to those ports where we may be landing and unloading our equipment, and then to our forward destinations. That's going to be very challenging. And in that kind of contested terrain, the force that is going to win is going to be the one who can do logistics, logistics, logistics. Something that, isn't the sexiest thing, frankly, that the Army does, but it is very important. And again, just look at how the Russian military in Ukraine has struggled to resupply and feed its soldiers. That shows you the importance of logistics today on a contested battlefield. So to realize this vision and ensure that we're able to develop the capabilities that we need to do those 6 core tasks, we need help from innovators, from a lot of you here today in the audience today, to be successful in our efforts. And we are really focused on cultivating a wide range of partnerships that are going to help us develop systems more quickly and build in more ability to update those systems over time as technologies improve. And to help us do this, Futures Command stood up a whole bunch of new organizations under its umbrella. And one of those is something called the Army Applications Lab. And that we stood up to help better connect the Army to relevant emerging commercial technology and to be able to bring that into the Army more quickly. Right now, Army Applications Lab is focused on partnering with small businesses that specialize in human performance, in robotics, in tactical artificial intelligence, as well as contested logistics. But we've also strengthened our collaboration with universities and research centers around the country. For example, we now have an Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. We are working with the Institute for Creative Technologies at the University of Southern California. And of course, we have the Bush Combat Development Complex right here at A&M that I had the opportunity to go and see myself today, and I was incredibly impressed. It's going to be critical for us, starting right away, to tap into the talent of students, researchers, and faculty at the nation's top colleges and universities, and certainly I would place Texas A&M right there in that category, so that we are able to outpace future threats and that we are able to best equip our soldiers. So let me talk a little bit about the work that's happening here at A&M on hypersonics, for example, which is an area of tremendous partnership with the Army and something that we are very, very interested in. Futures Command has tasked researchers here to focus on hypersonic and laser diagnostic systems to better characterize vehicle design in hypersonic flight and atmospheric effects on directed energy systems. Everyone say that 3 times quickly. The goal of this research is to provide greater fidelity to the computational modeling and simulation used to design and test these systems. That work is going to enable us in the Army to accelerate our research using larger scale models and test environments, and it will lessen the need for us to do full-scale tests, which saves us both time and money. And again, when I went to the BCDC earlier today, I was able to see some of this work myself, and I was reminded of a quote from General Patton, one of our more famous generals, who said, "Give me an army of West Point graduates and I'll win a battle, but give me a handful of Texas Aggies and I will win the war." So with no offense to any of you out there who are West Point graduates, including my executive officer, I have to say that to a Texas Aggie audience. But even as we are building the Army of 2030 today, we're already looking ahead to the Army of 2040. And Army Futures Command is very focused on looking ahead to the Army of 2040. They are already thinking about what challenges lie ahead for us and what new operational concepts should we be developing? What new capabilities are we going to need, in 2040 and beyond that will allow us to prevail? So I have tasked my Assistant Secretary for Acquisition, Mr. Doug Bush, who I think spoke to you all earlier today, to work with Futures Command to see how we can accelerate our science and technology efforts to help us develop capabilities more quickly. We can't see 2040 very clearly, but at a minimum, I think we know in the Army that we're going to need enhanced quantum computing capabilities. We're going to need to do more with biotechnology, and we're going to need to do more with robotics capabilities to meet the demands of the future battlefield. So we're going to invest in these kinds of emerging technologies because they have the potential to help us create leap-ahead military capabilities. And again, DARPA is an important partner here. DARPA is famous for developing leap-ahead military capabilities. And for us, leap-ahead capabilities could come from advancements in quantum navigation that help us create sensor systems to give soldiers the ability to navigate with precision in environments that are likely to be GPS denied. And certainly, there are a number of nation states around the world today that have the capabilities to deny our ability to work with GPS. Leaps forward could also come from investments in synthetic biology and biotechnology that revolutionize on-site combat medical care. For instance, synthetically produced blood or skin grafts could be available in remote locations in ways they are not today that could really help us with timely combat medical care. DARPA is behind another good example of how we can use biotechnology and how it can help us leap forward. Last year in Guam, DARPA took water and sand and in only 48 hours was able to construct a helicopter landing pad. Now you may ask yourself, why is something like that important other than kind of cool that they did it in 2 days? Well, the reality is that in the future, we are going to be fighting and sustaining ourselves from very remote and austere locations. And we're going to have to be able to move around quickly in a dispersed battlefield, again, where combat forces may be separated by great distances. So something like being able to create a helicopter landing pad quickly in an austere location will help us be able to move around and resupply ourselves. Because increasingly, as we look to the future, every node of the entire supply chain is vulnerable to disruption, whether that is through cyber attacks on the plants that make our replacement parts, or whether it is because we are denied access to airfields and ports that receive our equipment. Our ability to move and sustain our soldiers and their equipment is going to get harder, not easier. And to win the logistics fight, the Army of 2030 is going to need innovations that help us protect our data and equipment, that help us create new supply nodes, and to just basically help us improvise on the fly when necessary. And that brings me to autonomy and robotics. The Army is also working to develop systems that can operate autonomously in a contested or jammed environment. It's sort of like performing functions on your phone when you don't have cellular or Wi-Fi coverage or connection to the internet. And while autonomy research in major cities is pretty commonplace, any of you that might have been to Washington, D.C. in the last year have probably seen the food delivery robots that are roaming around on the sidewalks. But autonomy research in an uncontrolled combat situation is not nearly that far along. In a combat situation, you're going to need to be able, again, to process enormous amounts of raw, unlabeled data for a system to be able to identify, is what's ahead of me a tank or some other kind of obstacle, and then to plan an alternate route. That kind of decision-making process is really more like what we, as humans do, and as opposed to sort of numerical analysis. And the level of complexity involved into developing autonomous systems for that environment is really exponential. But we are working hard in the Army on, how can we do human-machine teaming, for example, to kind of address this kind of challenge or other similar problems and to find solutions to that. So really, robust collaborations with DARPA and, other pockets of innovation all around the United States are going to be critical for these kinds of initiatives to succeed. We really need the brightest minds working with us to conduct both basic and applied research and to translate scientific endeavors into military capability. And at the end of the day, to succeed, we are going to have to do that kind of work faster than our adversaries. Now, I'm pleased to say that, this kind of innovation that we're working on in the Army in partnership with Texas A&M, with DARPA, with USC, isn't confined just to research labs. A lot of this is already being tested out in the field. And I had the opportunity to see this myself just last week out in California at Fort Irwin, which is in the Mojave Desert. because the Army has been sponsoring a kind of an experimentation series called Project Convergence. We started Project Convergence about 2 years ago, and this is our sort of third iteration of this set of experiments. And this year what we did basically was we brought out not just Army forces, but our sister services again, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Space Force, but also DARPA. We had industry representatives working with us out at Fort Irwin. And we also had participation, actual participation, not just liaison observers from the United Kingdom and Australia, as well as observers from several other countries. And what we were doing there was testing a lot of these different kinds of technologies, and the Australians and the Brits were testing their different technologies. And one of the most interesting things that I saw, actually, was a live demonstration of a DARPA project called, and it's a mouthful again, Offensive Swarm-Enabled Tactics. We call it OFFSET for short. And OFFSET is basically designed to help Army tactical units use large collections of drones, basically unmanned, air and ground robots, to be able to do a couple of things. First, we can use these drone swarms to help, find an object on the battlefield, confirm that it's a target, and then actually be able to drop kinetic payloads on that target. But we can also, through the OFFSET program, use these drone swarms as kind of like a counter-vehicle obstacle, basically setting up mobile roadblocks to sort of stop enemy forces in their tracks. And I've seen a lot of drones. You all have seen drones if you watch the news. There are lots of commercial drones now, out there that hobbyists can use to take cool photographs and stuff. But actual drone swarms are not nearly as common. Some of you may have seen the movie Angel Has Fallen that came out, a few years ago, that opens with a very sort of dramatic scene of an attacking drone swarm. Again, I remember when I saw that, I thought, whatever, that's Hollywood, there they go again. And while, we're not yet at the point where you're seeing that commonly on the battlefield, I think that day is coming. And I was pretty impressed to see at Fort Irwin what just a first lieutenant and an Army specialist could do with one handheld tablet controlling basically dozens of drones in a swarm, which again, we will one day be able to use not just defensively to help protect our forces, but also potentially offensively. And that's a drone swarm is a very hard thing to defend against. Take it from me, the Army is spending millions of dollars to develop systems that can defend our forces against that kind of technology. So this was a pretty cool DARPA project. So at the heart, really, though, of all of these collaborations, whether it's DARPA, whether it's here at the Bush Combat Development Center, the heart of these partnerships is really people. Key to how we're going to get to where we need to go in the future is to find the right people behind all of these scientific innovations. We in the Army, if we're going to successfully build the Army of 2030 and then design the Army of 2040, we need talent. We need high-tech talent. Because again, we're not your grandfather's Army anymore. We really need digitally literate soldiers and scientists. We need coders, we need engineers, we need quantum physicists, we need scientists who are working on human-machine learning. We really need all sorts of different kinds of researchers to be able to drive the kind of innovation at the level of agility that our threats really require. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to be able to come and talk to this particular audience. Really, for over 50 years, the Army has supported a wide range of educational opportunities in science and technology, engineering and mathematics, not just for faculty members, but students as well. And we plan to do even more of that going forward in the next few years. We recently announced 40 student internships. These are opportunities at the White Sands Missile Range. Now, this is kind of a targeted opportunity for students at the University of Texas, El Paso and New Mexico State University, but we are looking to identify more of these kinds of opportunities all around the country at our bases and at our research labs. For example, we are looking to tap into and also help grow the tech talent in historically Black colleges and universities. And one of the things that we're doing there is the Army X-Tech program, which launched its first ever competition for faculty and students recently. The first faculty competition was held in August of 2021, and we had participation from HBCUs all around the country, as well as in the great state of Texas, including Prairie View A&M and Texas Southern. The first iteration of the X-Tech student competition kicked off just in September, and the Army looks forward to announcing the winners of that competition in February. We're also trying to sort of build our own talent inside of the Army, and a couple of examples of that go back to our Artificial Intelligence Center at Carnegie Mellon. We have two programs there. We have the AI Scholars Program and the AI Technician Program for soldiers, but also for Army civilians. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to say that you don't have to wear a uniform to work on all of these great and interesting projects in the Army. We also have thousands of civilians as part of our great Army, and so there are opportunities to work with us as civilians as well. But the Scholars Program at the AI Center provides the opportunity to pursue master's and doctorate degrees in data analytics, data engineering, and autonomous systems engineering. And our technician program prepares graduates to spend 2 years working for the Army's artificial intelligence factory, for example, or other parts of the Army. I was in Wiesbaden, Germany recently with the 18th Airborne Corps, and I ran into a captain who had been a member of our technician program. And investing in the next generation of talent is really going to be critical for us. And I'm really proud of the work that the Army is doing right now to build a high-tech workforce, again, both soldiers and civilians. At the end of the day, America needs an Army that's ready to protect and defend our country against a threat, whether it emerges next week or whether it emerges in the next decade. And we are always working every day to make sure that we can answer that call. I think it's interesting to remember that DARPA and the best minds in academia and industry were with us back in the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. And just as we worked together decades ago when I was in high school, we need to work together again to make sure that we are up to the pacing challenge of China and the acute threat that is posed by Russia. We are going to need a new generation of talent to help us innovate, and that is where all of you come in. I really challenge all of you to ask yourself, how can you join us in building the Army of 2030 and designing the Army of 2040? Our success and our ability, frankly, to be ready for what the future brings depends on being able to partner with all of you. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you. That was really comprehensive, so now it's got me thinking about all kinds of questions. And I know we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience. I'll start off with poking a little bit further. You talked extensively about priorities, and particularly in technology development. And I want to ask, dig a little deeper in terms of context. So as the Army shifts its focus from counterinsurgency and counterterrorism to large-scale combat operations, are there specific new capabilities that will be needed for our forces to win the next fight?
You know, we have really focused our efforts in 6 major portfolios. One is soldier lethality, and that's thinking about equipment that our soldiers are going to carry themselves, our new next generation squad weapon, for example, or IVAS, which is a headset that is based on a Microsoft, actually, commercial model, but is redesigned for combat situations that allows, our soldiers to, not just have night vision capabilities, but actually to be able to train in sort of a synthetic virtual reality kind of environment. So that's sort of portfolio 1. We are very focused on developing new air and missile defense capabilities, like I said, and there's some of our really, I think, more cutting edge work is looking at directed energy. And I found actually that some of the work that we're doing on directed energy, we have a 50 kilowatt laser, is going to be tested right here at the BAM. Director Tompkins and I were just out there. But we're also looking at high-powered microwave capabilities, for example. We have a third portfolio, Future Vertical Lift. This is really looking at new helicopters. Like I said, we've had the Black Hawk and the Apache as well as the Chinook around for a long time. So we are looking at, what is the next version of the Black Hawk, as well as potentially a reconnaissance helicopter. We're doing a lot with next generation combat vehicles, and that's where a lot of our robotics work is here. General Ross Kaufman, the Deputy Commanding General of Army Futures Command, is here with us today, but he used to lead the next gen combat vehicles cross-functional team, so he is very familiar with the work the Army is doing there. We have a whole line of work focused on network capabilities. Like I said, one of the 6 things that we've got to be able to do is share data across the Army and across services. So a lot of that is making sure that we have the network capabilities to do that. And then last, but certainly not least, we are very focused on long-range precision fires. As I said, one of the 6 things we've got to do is win the fires fight. We have things like HIMARS, which again, you've probably heard a lot about, in the context of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. We are looking at developing several new systems, starting with the extended range cannon artillery, which has a range of about 70 kilometers, going through precision strike missile, the mid-range capability, which is actually going to be a ground-launched weapon that could sink ships, all the way to the long-range hypersonic weapon, which has a range of over 1,000 kilometers. So those are, some examples, I would say, of the kinds of capabilities that we think we're going to need in the future, right, and a little bit of the technologies that are involved there.
Thank you. So to shift back to people a little bit, you talked about some of the efforts already that you're undertaking, but how can the Army and the larger defense innovation ecosystem more effectively market itself to attract a greater volume of young STEM talent? How can academia, private sector, working together assist the defense ecosystem in doing this?
That's a great question, and we have a lot of work to do there, and frankly, we're trying to do a lot. One, like I said, part of the reason we chose to bring Army Futures Command to Austin was to try to get better connected to the high-tech small business startup community and to kind of get outside of Washington, D.C., to parts of the country that maybe don't see the Army every day. We have the Army Applications Lab that helps us there. We have something called the Army Software Factory, which is actually, we have basically kind of harvested all of the coding talent from across the Army and are providing sort of a special 3-year program for people in the Army who, it may not be their normal day job in the Army, but who happen to be really good coders. And we are sending those people out to do fellowships, again, so they can kind of spread the gospel of the fact that there is a lot more opportunity in the Army. But I think, frankly, some of you may have heard, we along with the other services are experiencing some real recruiting challenges. And I think part of what I'm realizing is we have to reintroduce ourselves to the American public, and we need to help Americans better understand the need that we have for people with STEM backgrounds and the opportunities that we present to young people to be able to work in these areas. I think there's a fair amount of evangelizing that we need to be doing, but we are trying to have a lot more partnerships with universities around the country to both bring our Army personnel to universities and give them that experience, but also bring students and researchers from universities into the Army to have opportunities to work with us.
Well, on that note, could you talk a little more on the high-tech career fields that the Army offers, and maybe whether or not there are particular technical disciplines that you believe lack sufficient talent in the pipeline?
Well, we have 178 different military occupational specialties. So there's, for almost any kind of academic background, there is probably a job in the Army where you can apply those skills. I don't think that there's not a specific area that leaps out at me as a major capability gap. I do think data scientists are something that we are looking at needing. We think we need more data scientists in the Army. I would say in general, frankly, the Army needs more engineering talent. But this is not unique to the Army. I talk to a lot of CEOs of major defense companies, and they are all looking for engineers and frankly are competing against each other in many cases for engineering talent. So I think in general, our country needs to invest more in enticing kids into the STEM fields, because I think not just the Army, but the entire country needs those kinds of skills.
Can you say a bit more about what the Army is doing to recruit and grow that next generation of technical talent?
Yes, I think, a lot of what we're trying to do, again, is just make clear that while, yes, we still very much need infantry, tankers, attack helicopter pilots, we also have a lot of opportunities for data scientists. We have cyber warriors. The Army has actually led in a lot of dimensions on developing cyber capability. It's not a coincidence that the current head of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency is a 4-star Army general. But I think we just have to do a better job of communicating the breadth of opportunities and the breadth of career fields that there are in the Army. I think that's a lot of what we need to do. And we need to, I think, also do a better job of helping young Americans understand that the kinds of skills and educational experiences they can get in the Army are highly valued by civilian employers for those folks who may come into the Army but don't necessarily want to make a 20-year career of it.
I'll add, on behalf of the cyber folks at DARPA, they have always said that they particularly enjoy working with the our cyber folks, and they just think they have just been extraordinary in leading the way. So what role do you see DoD-led technical innovation playing in alternative warfare vectors, such as financial, information, economic, things like that?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I've thought too much about that. I guess I would say more broadly, almost everything now is interconnected. Just as I said that, I think if we were to get into a war, the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. I believe we would be attacked here in the United States in addition to wherever the conflict might break out. I think you can see that you can't really silo or stovepipe conflict anymore. Again, economic sanctions, for example, are a tool that gets used in a conflict situation. You can see, attacks on civilian critical infrastructure. So it's all interconnected in a way, and I think that's something that we have to better appreciate.
Absolutely. Can you share any Army-specific best practices for R&D organizations and how to more effectively transition technology into the Army?
I think what we found, this is an area, frankly, where I think the Army is doing much better. I have worked in the national security field since the mid-90s, and the Army was known, frankly, to kind of struggle to really develop new weapon systems and to take a very long time and to often really not even be able to bring new systems over the finish line. And we have made a number of changes to how we develop and acquire new capabilities. And one of the things that I think we've done that really has made a difference is we work as a team where we bring together our partners in industry, our partners in academia, with our Army operators and with our soldiers to think through, the requirements up front. And then once we set the requirements or think that we have a direction that we're going in, to really have an iterative approach with our soldiers where we start putting early technology into their hands, let them experiment with it, see what's working, give feedback, back to the companies that are developing the system, tweak it, and sort of take more of a crawl, walk, run approach. And I think that teaming approach and that more iterative design has proved to be much more effective. And I'm not saying that, that we won't have the occasional bump in the road with our modernization programs, but I think this more iterative and more collaborative approach has really helped us.
To follow on that, what are the greatest pain points that you currently experience in accelerating defense innovation? So especially adoption of cutting-edge technology, maybe flexible partnership with startups or primes, academia, things like that.
Yeah, pain points, there are so many. Everything from, we're in a war for talent, like I said. A lot of the folks with the kinds of technical backgrounds that we need, we're competing against the big defense primes. other commercial interests. So that's an issue. Getting security clearances, frankly, for our people to be able to work with us. Getting security clearances for researchers here at a place like Texas A&M, that can be a challenge. I think, frankly, convincing some of these smaller startups who are often working with venture capital, convincing those venture capital firms that there is actually, something in it for them, and that they are going to be, and that, they can trust the Army enough to get something over the finish line, that can be a real challenge. So I think, we have, again, really tried to look inward at ourselves and say, where can we make our processes, our acquisition processes, our contracting approaches more agile, so that the venture capitalists will support some of those smaller startups working with us. I will say, Congress has been very helpful in giving us some new authorities to be able to do some of our acquisition in a different way than how we've done it in the past. We've been using those new authorities to good effect with a lot of the programs that I talked about in those 6 portfolios. And I think that's paying off. So, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Congress for the new authorities have helped us.
That's great. So we have a great question here focusing on joint research. So you mentioned multi-service partnerships in Project Convergence. Are there other example joint research efforts with the other services? And if these are desirable to the Army, how can the research community best participate in joint endeavors?
Yeah, the most obvious, I would say, example of where we are working with another service to really try to develop something is the mid-range capability. This is a very long, long-range artillery system, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. And we've been partnering with the Navy on that, I think, again, very effectively. But we are really trying to look, frankly, with our sister services for other opportunities where we can work together. And the Project Convergence series has been a good example of how we're trying to do that. I'm sure there are some other examples that are just not immediately coming to mind. But one thing I can think of, for example, Northrop Grumman is developing a system for us called Integrated Battle Command System. And that is kind of a software system that kind of, runs behind the curtain, if you will, but it's very, very important to making some of our systems work more effectively. And I think other services are using that as well. So, and in terms of how, researchers can, be made aware of these kinds of things, I think, again, as I understand it, in some cases there's a hypersonics consortium, for example, that is comprised of not just the Army, but, a lot of different universities. And I think, what we need to make sure we're doing in the Army is going out and taking advantage of talking to consortiums like that and making sure that we're making the academic community aware of the kind of work we're doing and where we think academia can be helpful to us. And again, that's a lot of that work happens with the Army Futures Command and the Army Research Lab system.
So you touched on this already, but can you say a little bit more about lessons learned by the U.S. in the technology space from the Ukrainian conflict, and if there were any specific gaps that are identified?
Sure. There have been a few, I think, really big, I would say, the way I would describe it is what we are seeing in Ukraine with Ukraine fighting against Russia has really confirmed in a lot of ways the direction that the Army has decided to go in the last few years. The Army actually undertook some very significant analysis a few years ago before I became Secretary of the Army. We called it the Large-Scale Combat Operations Study, and it was really designed to look at, okay, we know we're going to be pivoting away from counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and facing more, near-peer nation-state competitors. What kinds of challenges do we think that's going to pose? And one of the things that came out of that, for example, as an area that we were really going to have to work on was threats posed by unmanned aerial systems, i.e. drones. And you have absolutely seen, again, the use of drones in Ukraine, although we also see them in the Middle East, for example. So I think that's an area where it wasn't a new insight, but it has underscored to us the importance of being able, making sure that we develop systems that can defeat these drone threats. And making sure that, for example, with our tanks that we have, our tanks are obviously very heavy, very well armored, but they were not so much designed, back in the day to be protected from aerial threats. Whereas now with drones, that's a real issue. So we've got to be thinking about how are we going to protect, how are we going to be protecting our tanks from basically aerial threats. Another insight I would say that's come out of what we're seeing in Ukraine is the importance of developing really mobile command posts. We have got to be able to, the days of sort of being able to be out on the battlefield with a large command post that you could, take hours or days to set up and hours or days to take down, those days are gone. Now we're facing enemies that can, fire artillery at us or precision missiles at us and destroy those command posts. So we've got to be able to have technologies and systems that allow us to be much more mobile and agile on the battlefield. I would say another thing that that what we see in Ukraine underscores a lesson for us is how transparent the battlefield is becoming. Again, in part because drones can be used essentially to conduct surveillance. If an army formation is emitting a signature, if you will, a signal, whether it is electronic information, whether it's kind of a physical footprint, if you can be seen, you can be targeted and killed. So we've got to be thinking about how can we reduce the footprint of our formations, or how can we hide those signatures, those electronic signatures, for example, in larger clutter so that they're indistinguishable. But so there's quite a bit of work, I think, for us to be doing in that area.
Absolutely. All right, one last question, and this one's getting very specific. The forward operating base of 2040 will have dramatically higher energy requirements. Are there energy and storage and power technologies that the Army's cultivating now to meet the demands of high-tech forward operating bases of the future?
Yes, we are looking at, and I'm pleased to get this question to have the opportunity to mention it. The Army is really doing a lot when it comes to electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, for example. I just want to note that the Army has set a goal for ourselves that by 2035, all of our non-tactical vehicles will be fully electric. That is a very big goal. But with the Army being the largest service, I think it's incumbent on us to really stretch ourselves to do what we can to reduce our carbon emissions footprint, for example. But but frankly, fully electric combat vehicles are probably a ways away for obvious reasons. There aren't charging stations. If it's hard to find a charging station for your Tesla, you're certainly not going to find a charging station out on the battlefield. But so we're doing a lot looking at hybrid drives, and one of the kind of collateral benefits of this kind of a system is that you can use those vehicles as charging stations for your other systems. Yeah. And I was somewhere, I feel I do a lot of traveling, so it was probably out at Project Convergence in Fort Irwin, where I saw some of these hybrid vehicles. And the amount of power that they can generate for other Army systems is really pretty remarkable. So I think that will be a big part of the solution for us for the forward operating bases of the future.
That's an exciting note to end on. Yeah.